Thank you, Jill. I've got my co-host back today. She's on the road, but she's co-hosting. So we were paying a little attention to the out-breath there. It's a very Buddhist thing to do, to accentuate the out-breath, because actually that'll be our last moment in this incarnation. Nobody ends an incarnation on an in-breath. It just doesn't happen. It's always on the out-breath. And so the Buddhists stress that. The Buddhists stress that. I've got to say that my Buddhist teachers, especially the Tibetans, helped me a lot with my view of death and my whole relationship with what will happen someday when this body stops. The Trappists also. I worked with the Trappist. I worked with my Trappist mentor from I guess it was 1982 to 2000 with Father Gregory, 18 years. And they've updated the whole practice, but in the Middle Ages, when a monk, when they would go to refectory to eat their main meal of the day, they'd have candles on the table, and the candles were in the brain pan of a previous monk. If that'll get your attention, I think. What's called back then memento mori. In other words, remember death, which is remembering life too, if you think about it. It can seem creepy at first, but they were trying to say, some monk came before you, some monk's coming after you. What are you doing with this life? Wake up. That's it's a good thing. And when I had both parents in the house, basically dying in this house over the course of 7 years, I was faced with this, although I was really trying to sort of deny it. I went to almost got killed, a Russian out from school, after school, to go to a Christian Zen retreat out at the monastery that was led by Daegak, who was a Korean Zen master. And I tried to pass a bus in the rain, and then the bus put on its left turn signal, and he was forcing me off the road. I literally went off the road and hit the bus a little bit. So I was shook up. The bus stopped, but there's really no damage, but I was shook up. And so when I got in there and met with the Zen master, he said, what happened to you? He was pretty perceptive. He could see I was shook up. And I said, I was, sort of speeding to get out here to the monastery to help Brother Anthony set up the room. And I passed a bus. I gave him the whole thing. He said, well, let me get this straight. You were rushing out to the monastery to sit still for 2 days. Is that right? And I said, yeah. He says, that maybe that sums up your life. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, he says, let's work with this koan this year. And I said, okay. And he said, when you die, because he knew about my parents. So he went right to the juggler. He said, when you die and your body turns to dust and it blows to the 10 directions, where's your true self then? Well, thanks, because he was just he was just calling me to it. So that was the cheery koan I was sitting with. When you die and your body turns to dust and goes to the 10 directions, where's your true self then? There's other ones that sort of hit at the same thing. But that he was dialing it right in, because I was living with these two people who were going to die in the house, and I was still racing around. Maybe could have got myself killed. So he was sort of pointing out the insanity, but I sat with that. That was a good one to sit with. So, and then the Tibetans helped me throughout that whole period. I read the book. If you don't have this book on your shelf, you should have it. It's called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. It's a whole comprehensive course in what the Tibetans have learned from studying death for 700 years. Plus, it's a real manual for Buddhist practice too, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. I was reading that. My copy during those 7 years fell apart, that I read it so much. So So well, let's meditate a little bit on it. This poem today sort of opens it up and then connects it with what we're doing here. What remains when the deep warmth of the womb fades away? What remains when your baby shoes fade away? What remains when your childhood illusions fade away? When your high school friends fade away? What remains when your best laid plans fade away? When all your grades, awards, and even your failures fade away? What remains when your job, career, or marriage fades away? When your home, money, and security fades away? What remains when your family and friends begin to fade away and that thin red line gets a whole lot thinner? What remains when that thin red line fades away as you cross it? Popular culture exists to distract you from asking this question. May you live long enough to embrace the ultimate mystery. And may you be fortunate enough to taste one sip of an answer. This is why we meditate, to taste, to experience what remains. Tasting the truth will set you free. You can't start to be eternal. You can't start to be eternal. Let's call that what remains. It's a good question. Zoom in on really something that starts to hit you. Sometimes it hits you early when you have tragedy early in your life. I didn't lose anyone in my life that was close to me till I was 40, which was rather late. Um, my grandmother died when I was 40. That was really the first. But that question, what remains when your family and friends begin to fade away and that thin red line gets a whole lot thinner? That term, the thin red line, came from a letter that Thomas Hardy, uh, English novelist, he wrote. It was writing a letter to a friend about a mutual friend that had just passed away, and he talked about that thin red line got a little thinner. That's that separation from us and those that graduate from this life to whatever's next. And when you're young, the thin red line is you don't even think about it. If you think about it at all, sometime it's that's later. That's for old people. Well, we know that's not true. Now the young are actually the number one people who are perishing from the COVID, at least in this country, and you know the young worldwide are passing away from starvation. Just not so much in this country, but sometimes in this country too, which is a kind of a tragedy. So this thin red line, what remains when this thin red line fades away as you cross it? Now that's a key question to factor in death into this thing we call life. You cannot separate them. If we do, like what I said after that is popular culture exists to distract you from asking this question. And our culture especially distracts us from asking almost any question, but certainly it's made to do that. the Pulitzer Prize in 1974 was given to a guy named Ernest Becker, who wrote a great book called The Denial of Death. And it was a terrific book. You should have it on your shelf. Just to he talked about popular cultures are built to distract us from this question about death. May you live long enough to embrace this ultimate mystery, to really say, okay, I'm going to hold this in awareness, the fact that this thing doesn't go on forever, at least in this form. And may you be fortunate enough to get one sip of an answer. Because it's a big question, what remains? And then at the end, I said, this is why we meditate. I mean, I didn't start this way. I was 22 when I started, almost 50 years ago. And I just wanted to get some stress relief. While I was teaching, I couldn't deal with it. And I just needed something, to give me just a little stress relief. So I wasn't thinking about life or death. I was just thinking about trying to be a little less stressed out. And that's often the way people do enter meditation. It doesn't matter the door you enter by. I wasn't thinking about enlightenment. I wasn't thinking that I'd be here with you talking about death. That was not in the picture at all. So why you come here? It doesn't matter. Rumi says, come. Doesn't matter why you come. Just come. Come to the practice somehow. But we meditate to taste and experience what remains. Tasting the truth will set you free. You can't start to be eternal. You can't start to be eternal. That was the one thing it was a little, it's like the princess and the pea. It was like a little pea under my mattress when I was in grade school with the Dominicans, and they would say, when you die, then you go on to eternal life. And then, if you really screwed up, you'd go to hell for eternity, which they said was a hell of a long time. And then if you sort of managed your way through this with some kind of, you weren't grievous, you might have to work it off a little bit in purgatory, but then you go to heaven for eternity. And this whole idea, somehow, of course I wanted to go to heaven, but that thought was a little bit, it put me off a little bit. I thought about being in church forever. And I said, well, I don't know. So I was conflicted. But the whole idea of eternity, I just couldn't quite, it was just a hell of a long time is what they basically said, or heaven of a long time. But actually, you can't start to be eternal. Eternity can't start somewhere, if you think about it. It's just impossible. That's not eternity. We'd have to be in right now if it exists at all. So tasting that truth will set you free. So when we drop down, I know I've used the image of the dance, which I like a whole lot because it's a verb. And our life in our language, especially English language, or as the English say, the American language, which is what we speak, it's built on nouns. I talk to you. It's all like that. And so I is a noun, and we're very much built on that. And other languages are not built that way. So then meditation becomes a noun, God becomes a noun, everything becomes a thing, and then we think about it. The word thing and think are the same thing. They're coming from the same root. You cannot think about God. You cannot, if you make God a thing, you're off the track. So this idea that everything is a verb, God is a verb, Buckminster Fuller said that back in the 60s. The idea that we're all in a way in motion totally comports with what modern physics says about the quantum universe and the huge universe. the macro universe as well. It's all moving all the time. So dance really works. But I'm stressing here the sense of why we meditate: to taste, to experience what remains. And tasting is a verb. See? To taste the truth. Jesus says, taste and see. You see. So when we move into the meditation, um, we're going to taste and experience what remains. And you can't start to be eternal. Just let that sink in a little bit. We're either there right now or we'll never be. And so another way to look at it is you're dropping into eternity. And of course, we do have to leave things behind, but we're going to have to leave things behind. We're going to have to leave everything behind at some point. So why not practice and get sort of relaxed with this? And so meditation is like practicing for death, so that when we do it, we won't be, die before you die. So when you do die, you won't be so freaked out. You'll actually be able to relax into that last out breath to whatever's next, And most traditions talk about that there's something after that. I mean, certainly Christianity and Buddhism both, especially in the Tibetan version. That show goes on. It ain't ever over. It ain't over till it's over, and it ain't ever over for Tibetans or really the deep traditions. So think about that, and then forget it, and then just drop, and then taste what eternity might feel like, what it does feel like. Gets silent, gets still, even though we're dancing in it. It's a great metaphor that T.S. Eliot uses in the Four Quartets. Dancing in the stillness. Yeah. So now's our chance to do a little practice with this. But that core question, what remains? Good one. Good one to live with for a while. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's shift into meditation mode then.